Hello and welcome back to another Outlaw Diaries, where we talk to people who've left the well-worn professional path and created something completely their own. Today's guest is the brilliant and deeply inspiring Sulari Gentill, a former lawyer who gave up corporate contracts and courtrooms for characters and plot twists.
So lawyer turned writer might sound tidy on paper, but this is a story full of doubt, determination, a bit of truffle farming and cow pregnancy testing, and what Sulari describes as hysterical, giddy excitement.
We talk about what it's really like to walk away from a stable career before the next chapter is guaranteed, the identity shift that comes with it, and how the messy middle isn't just inevitable, but maybe even essential.
So this is one for anyone who's sitting in the in-between, wondering if they're too late, whether things are just too uncertain or it's too impractical to go outlaw. Spoiler alert, it's not.
Hello and welcome to Outlaws. Sulari, thank you so much for being with us today. We're so excited to have you.
Absolute pleasure.
This is one of our Outlaws Diaries episodes where we talk to people about the transitions that they've made in their lives. Previously a lawyer, now an author and truffle farmer. But maybe just to start, tell us a little bit about, I guess, how you would describe your previous career and how it was that you made it to your current career.
I was a corporate lawyer. So I worked for large energy corporations, and it was actually a really interesting job because one day you'd be doing, a tort or a contract. You'd be doing international swap agreements. Other days you'll be talking to ASIO, that sort of thing. So it was a huge range of stuff. And I was, quite content, happy being a lawyer. I thought, it's one of those professions that it's hard to be miserable in because it's well paid. and it's one of those dissonance things that you'll put up with a lot because it's well paid. And it also has the added advantage of social status. So lawyers walk out in the world. People want lawyers on their Trivial Pursuit tables. They think we're clever. All of that sort of stuff that gets fed into the whole package of being a lawyer. And it was my identity. That was who I was. And it's one of those things that people don't realize. When you say what you do, it pegs you in people's minds and it pegs you for yourself. This is who I am. This is what I do. I worked hard and I got a degree and I'm not to be pushed around, and I'm not going to be a meek person. All of those sort of things that you don't actually verbalize in yourself, except it's there. It just is part of the whole package.
It's like a soundbite, people say, what do you do? You go lawyer, and everyone goes, okay, right, move on.
We know where you fit. We know, we can take a reasonable guess on, who you are as a person. Sometimes that's not true, but it does. It is that soundbite. But what I found was that I was also a serial hobbyist. So I was one of these people. I was a corporate lawyer. I think I was good at my job. I was moving up the ladder very quickly. But I also had a very sharp compartmentalization of my life. Once I left the office, I left the office. And I suppose it was back in those days when you could actually leave the office. Nowadays they hunt you down with your social media and your laptops and your phones. But I refused to get a mobile phone for a long time because I did not want to be tracked home.
Good on you.
But I was a serial hobbyist, so I'd pick up these hobbies and I'd do them really intensely for about 6 months, where they were my life for 6 months. And as soon as I mastered them, I'd move on, do something else. So I was quilting, I was making porcelain dolls, I was stained glassing, I was building gardens like I was from Babylon. I can pregnancy test your cows. Should you ever need that service?
We'll talk about it because I've got a few cows out the back that I'm not sure about.
That you need checked. And so I started writing in exactly the same way. I'd finished the welding course. I was looking for something to do. And, at the time I didn't realize why I was hobbying like a lunatic. But I think it was because there was some part of me that was not fulfilled. by being a lawyer. There's some creative part of me that needed an outlet. And it always felt to me when I was practicing that it was like there was something I'd forgotten to do.
Interesting.
And I had that sensation, like, oh, there's something I should have done. I forgot to do it. And when I started writing, I suddenly realized what I'd forgotten to do.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. So obvious, such obvious creative outlets that you were.
Yeah, but but I thought I wanted to quilt and pregnancy test cows, and I thought that was what I was interested in, but it wasn't. That was just sometimes you're just looking for a way to tell a story, and sometimes even lawyers are really obtuse and they don't realize that that's what their mind, their creativity, their soul is trying to tell them. And they do things like welding courses and porcelain doll making and so on, thinking that that's how to fill this gap.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like there wasn't like a sudden realization. It was just a sort of slow beast.
Well, when I started writing, it was reasonably sudden. It suddenly felt like I was breathing properly for the first time. And it was that feeling of, oh, that's what I forgot. That's what I forgot to do. And it took over very quickly. I was still working when I started writing, but I realized reasonably quickly that I stopped caring about the law. Just stopped caring. So I started winding back my legal career, and I sort of segued into a different type of law where I wasn't frontline corporate lawyer. I started serving on boards where, your role is just to be wise for a couple of hours a month. And that got me out of the whole position of just, wanting to be writing, just thinking about next chapters and telling stories as opposed to, contracts.
Can I just take you back a little bit? Because I'm interested to know, and I think this is true for a lot of lawyers who, about why they chose to do law in the first place. And so I'd be interested to hear a bit more about what your thought process was. Was there a thought process? For a lot of us, there isn't. But what led you to study law in the first place?
Look, it's like everything. There's not just one thing. There's a number of things. I'm from a South Asian family, and they're highly professionally oriented. And so, when I was growing up, I had three options for jobs. I could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Nothing else. That was it. And I actually was a rebel. I was the middle child, and I rebelled, and I thought, no, I'm going to upset everybody. I'm going to be an astrophysicist, because I'd always had a fascination with the stars. And I thought that that's what astrophysics was. I would be sitting there looking at the stars. And actually, it's not. It's a lot of maths. That's what astrophysics is. It's a lot of understanding pure and theoretical maths. And I did that for a year, and I hated it. I just hated it. And I thought, I can't do this. Not only, intellectually, I might have passed the course, but I noticed that the people around me were just not my people. So the people doing that course, and sometimes you can recognize where you're meant to be by looking around you and thinking, are these my people?
Yep.
And they weren't. And so I made the decision after a year of astrophysics that I was going to switch my course, which was a big deal in those days. Back then, you went to university and you finished the darn degree you started. So it was a big drama for everyone in my family when Sulari didn't want to be an astrophysicist anymore, despite having upset everybody's plans that she should be a doctor in order to become an astrophysicist. And then I had to sit down and think, well, what else will I do? And my theory was, okay, I need to come up with something, but I don't ever want to do maths again. Ever. What course can I find that doesn't require mathematics? And I thought, law. Oh yeah, I can do that. I don't need to be passionate about it, but I can do it.
Yep.
And once I started it, I actually enjoyed the course. So that worked for me, and I graduated as a lawyer, and certainly amongst the lawyers, they were more my people than the mathematicians. I'm not sure that they were entirely my people, but they were more my people than the mathematicians. And to be honest, a lot of lawyers are exactly like me. They're looking for a tribe. They're not really sure they should be lawyers either.
It's interesting, isn't it, Kate? You and I have talked about those sort of cultural pressures that maybe it's sort of informed some of what it is that we've done. But it sounds like, Sulari, that was really relevant for you early on in the decision about.
It is. I remember I was born in Sri Lanka, so I'm an immigrant. But I remember amongst the young kids in the Sri Lankan society, when we used to hang around, we used to have this saying, doctor, lawyer, engineer. That's it. What are you going to be? Doctor, lawyer, engineer. And that was the scope. And I think part of it is because immigrants, move to a new country because they want their children to do well. And those are the classic professions of doing well. Saying to my parents that I wanted to be a writer would have been like saying to them I wanted to be a rock star. It was not in our field at all. It was not an acceptable profession. I mean, it's ridiculous when you think about it now, but the world has moved on and things change. But back in those days, there was a lot of pressure, particularly on migrants, prove themselves.
And so you said that when you started writing, then, there was almost this grand internal release, I suppose, that you felt. How did you come to start writing? Was that just one of the other things?
It was just one of the hobbies. Yeah, I'd finished the welding course. I was thinking, oh, what can I do? I'd already, ticked off quilting and ceramic doll making and almost everything you can think of. I'd done it by then.
Pregnancy testing now, that's very...
Exactly.
That's a very
that was a funny story.
That doesn't, to me, that's not. You've got quilting, you've got porcelain dolls, and then pregnancy testing cows. That is a bit of a out of left field.
I live in the country.
Okay, all right.
And I had been at a friend's place, and I was just one of those people that whatever was offered to me, I'd try it. And her husband was going out pregnancy testing his herd, and he made a joke and said, "Oh, you can come with me if you want. I'll teach you how to do it." Expecting me to say no. And I said, sure. And I went out with him. And of course, Seamus is a great big man. He's 6 foot something or other with great big long arms and limbs. And I'm 5 foot. And we were pregnancy testing his Angus herd. And for him, he'd stick his hand in to...
Okay, right. So it's not just getting a cow to wee on one of a really big stick.
No.
And then wait for the line
to internal examination.
Colour.
And so he put his hand in. He put his hand in and go into the elbow. But because I'm short, I'd be basically climbing into the cow to reach. But it was one of those mad things. And then I learned how to do it. And it was because of this constant feeling of searching for what it was that I was supposed to be doing. And so, I was just looking for something else to occupy my time. And I thought, oh, I'll write a novel. And I didn't expect it to ever go anywhere. I didn't expect anyone to ever read it. I didn't expect it to ever be published. I just thought, I'll write a novel. I'll tell a story. How hard can that be? Humans are a storytelling species. We walk around telling stories to each other all the time. I just have to tell a long one. And I sat down and I started writing. And it was like breathing properly for the first time. And it was, so I realized very quickly that this was the thing that I had forgotten to do.
Were you writing that book when you were working full time? So did you decide at that point?
Yes. So I was consulting by then. So I was working more than full time, funnily enough, and I had a small child. I was consulting a lot, and I had been appointed to my first board. I thought, there's a novel. I thought it would be 6 months of playing around like all the other hobbies were, and then I'd move on and find something else to do. But it didn't turn out to be the case.
Yeah,
so,
right.
And I guess I'm just curious. So there's a moment you're writing, and there's a transition phase, obviously, too, isn't there?
There is definitely a transition phase. So at that time, that's when I realized that I was fighting I'm a well-trained lawyer and I knew what I was doing. So I was still functioning perfectly well as a lawyer, but I was aware that I didn't care as much. So I noticed the shift. There was a time when the success of the legal problem or whatever was my creative triumph.
Mm.
But once I had the writing, I just realized that there was something missing. I became less and less interested in the law, and more wanting to free my mind to write. You can write anytime. You don't even have to have a pen in your hand. You can be thinking about it.
Yep.
So it's a really addictive, dangerous thing to have if you haven't got something that's equally strong to keep you focused on what you should be doing. And so that's when I started to wind back and started to move my career into more board work at the time.
And was that scary when you thought?
No, it was, you know, I was just so in love with the writing. I could have, you know, if someone had told me you have to go into a war zone in order to do it, I would have said fine. I was just so, it was just, at the time, it was like an explosion. And it's, you know, a sudden realization, and suddenly the whole world started to make more sense to me.
That's so wonderful. Like what a gift though to have that certainty in some ways where you're pulled towards something that you can't not do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing with writing. It's not it's not like the law, it's not like medicine, it's not even like a job at McDonald's. It's not secure or sane. In order to actually be a writer, you have to have that kind of explosion where you're willing to risk everything. I had 2 small children and I threw the dice.
Yep. And so was there any particular moment that sort of that you can remember or you can recall, or whether it may well have just been an inevitable pulling towards, but was there a tipping point when you thought, okay, this is my new job?
I think I knew when I started writing that I wasn't ever going to stop. For it to be a job, someone has to want to publish you.
Yeah.
And, you know, give you access to a readership that will actually pay to read your work. So from the beginning, the realization was I would never stop writing. The realization that I would make money out of it or I would become a professional writer didn't happen until that first manuscript got accepted. So, you know, and at the time, people tell you stories of people waiting 10 years for the first manuscript to be accepted, all of that. And that does happen sometimes. For me, the stars aligned quickly. And my first manuscript was accepted pretty quickly by a number of publishers, and I decided which publisher I wanted to go with. But I don't want anyone to think that that's because I'm particularly gifted or there's something special about my writing. It's not. Sometimes you're just lucky. Stars aligned. It's actually, there are ebbs and flows in publishing, and sometimes you're lucky and you get in quickly. Sometimes it takes you 10 years to find your ebb.
Maybe. I think you might also be not giving yourself quite enough credit there. But I mean, so I think that might be a great segue to say that I've just read The Mystery Writer, which I've really enjoyed. So I'm not surprised that there were publishers who were clambering to publish your work. But as I was reading The Mystery Writer, it struck me actually the parallels, I suppose, because Theo, the main character, started studying law because there was maybe a fair bit of pressure to do that, and then she decided that she didn't want to do that. And there was a really great sentence that you wrote when Theo was reflecting on her decision to leave law school, when she finally became brave enough, I suppose, or gathered the courage in order to write to them and say, I'm leaving. And you wrote that she was unprepared for how untethered that act made her feel and how stateless. And I just thought, you know, I was reading it on Kindle and I was like, highlight. That. I just thought how true that was. And it goes back to your previous point that you were making around, I guess, the identity and the status that comes with a particular profession, in this case, law, and how true it is that when you're trying to break free of that, or when you're considering breaking free of that, there's an untethering and a real statelessness that you have to contemplate, and it's scary.
It is. It was a terrifying thing in that sense. When I stopped saying I was a lawyer and started saying I was a writer, it was terrifying. And I had the double whammy in that I was an immigrant from an Asian culture, and there was a kind of a well, I don't know if it was a real prejudice, but or an oversensitivity that a lot of Asian women have, that we don't want to be seen as subservient. But I sort of I sort of found myself really having a struggle with, not with so much wanting to be a lawyer or wanting the money, but with the notion of what other people would think I was. And a writer is one of those nebulous sort of things. People can think, oh, she's just, she's at home. She's calling herself a writer because she doesn't have a job. And so I was really caught up in that. And I was really surprised at how much I never thought that I valued my own status so much. I believed fiercely that I was egalitarian. That any job was as good as any other job. That's what I always believed. It's the way I'd always voted. It's what I'd always stood for. And then suddenly I wasn't a lawyer anymore, and I had to stop myself telling people I was a lawyer. I had to stop myself telling people that, because I felt untethered, and I felt like, how are people going to know that I'm doing these things by choice? And now I look back and think, well, does it matter? Does it matter that you did it that you left behind another career to write? Would you have been any better a writer if you'd written because you desperately needed to do it to earn money because you weren't qualified in anything else? I mean, J.K. Rowling wrote to put food on the table, and so it was confronting in that you do feel untethered and stateless, but also you suddenly realize that you cared. I thought I was better than that. I thought I was more evolved than that. But for a while there, I felt like, lesser. And untethered. And it's not like that I ever considered going back to the law for that, because writing was just such an epiphany for me and such a joy. But on those occasions when people said, what do you do? I had to remind myself not to bring in the fact that I had been a lawyer.
It's so great to know in some ways, because clearly the pull to writing for you was so strong. There was never actually a doubt in your mind that that was what you were going to do. But even despite that, you were feeling the statelessness that came from leaving a profession like law. So I think, again, for people maybe that are thinking about doing this or are doing it, when you're feeling that statelessness, it's great, I think, just to hear that even though you're very clear on what it is that you want the next thing to be, or even if you're not, it's just normal. And it's kind of just part of what it is that you've got to go through, I think. It's like a grief maybe. And I wonder also if part of it is because there's a community that goes with any profession, and a lot of people who are in that profession, and you work the same as all of the people in that profession. There's just so many similarities that you really...
There's that whole team thing, which I still miss to this day. You don't write as a team. It's a very solitary profession. And whilst I love that part of it as well, I do miss that whole office teamwork thing that does occur. But I think also the thing with writing is it's not a structured profession. So with, doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant, person who works waiting, all of those jobs have structures. They have hierarchies. They have paychecks. And they have rules. None of that with the writer.
The attraction is, like you say, there's that clear pathway forward. And I think when we go, for a lot of us, we go through school, we go through university, and we're just following a script. And there's that moment when you come loose. If you go into law, there's that comfort, isn't there, I think, of staying within the structures that whole time. You don't really have to create anything because that structure is there for you. But yeah, once you step off that, like you say, especially for something like a writer, which doesn't have that set.
Yeah. And as a lawyer, you just have to do your job. The problem is placed in front of you, you solve the problem. It takes a while to to feel comfortable and accepted. And, even when I was a lawyer, I had imposter syndrome. I always felt like I was looking over my shoulder and saying, they'll realize I'm not that clever soon. That is exponentially amplified when you're a writer. Because, you have nothing to hide behind for us to actually exist. But it is a really difficult thing you take, because I have never met a writer who doesn't do their best, who isn't offering something to the reading public that is the best that they can produce. But the reading public doesn't care that it's your best. And so it is a really, really vulnerable position to be in. I remember the first time my book was out there, and when reviews come in, you can get 100 rave reviews, and the one negative review will gut you.
Yeah.
As you get, now I've got, in August will be my 17th published book.
Wow.
As you become long in the tooth and your hide gets thicker, what you realize is that those negative reviews are as important as the positive ones, because what you are doing is having a conversation with the reading public. And it's a little bit like, a book club. So when you have a book club and everybody loved the book, the conversation's very boring and it's all over in 5 minutes, and you move to wine and cheese and start gossiping about the neighbours. But if you have at least, a couple of people in the book club who hated the book, then the conversation is great and it'll go on till 2 a.m.
That's true. That's my book club all of the time.
Exactly. So you need those dissenters to actually make your book a conversation as opposed to something pretty.
I like that. I'm going to remind my book club of that next time, because I'm usually the dissenter.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we need our dissenters. We need our dissenters.
So, Sulari, my background is in higher education. So I've been involved in teaching in law schools for many, many, many years. And I'm curious because I know I very much believe in the value of a legal education. So I guess my perspective is always the value of a legal education anyway, even if we go on to do different things. Do you think your legal career, has it helped? Has it hindered? Is it neutral in terms of the career you've since followed?
Oh, it's absolutely helped. And it's not about, it's not about knowing case law or anything like that. It's the kind of grundnorm of the legal profession that you get. You get a really solid understanding of perspective. You get a really solid understanding of equity. And, if you know when you're presenting a case, how emotion works and how to play to that. So in essence, when you are writing a book, you're writing for a jury. So all of that works. And the wonderful thing about writing is there is no wasted time. Everything you ever said, felt, learned, observed is all material. The lawyers don't sit there and say, well, waiting for the muse. You have an advice, you sit down, you write it. And that's a really good training for a writer. You don't, you just put it out. And you see that with writers who have been lawyers, writers who have been journalists. We don't wait for the muse, we write. I don't think it's any less creative. I think in some ways we've learnt to grab hold of the muse and chain her to our desk. And get control of it. But it's not only the law, the mathematics. I have a sub-major in mathematics because of the astrophysics thing. But again, the logic that I was taught in learning pure mathematics has allowed me to write mysteries without plotting, because somewhere ingrained into my brain is this logic of inductive reasoning, which is the same thing that you use in mathematics. So I don't need to plot it out. It all works out in the end. So it's, I don't ever regret it.
I think, Kate, that goes back to our sort of sunk cost fallacy a couple of weeks ago, doesn't it? It's so difficult for people to walk away from a career that they feel like they've invested a lot in, that's maybe cost them a lot of money, and that idea of, well, I can't just throw it all away. So it's so great, I think, to hear that from you, and in ways that people might not contemplate normally,
Yeah. Who would have thought a maths degree would be any use to a writer? Sort of a kind of a shortcut into the character's mind.
One of the things you talked about was, sort of having to leave the big paycheck and all of that kind of stuff. Do you define what success is differently?
It's difficult because when I started, the publishing house that I was with was great. All of a sudden, I was appearing at Sydney Writers Festival and so forth. I was being shortlisted for prizes, but there was no money at all. It was lovely to get the book out there, lovely to talk to readers, but it was never, ever going to earn me more than a bit of pin money.
Right.
Tiny amounts of money. I could earn more money at McDonald's. But anyway.
And so when you were at that point, were you never thinking, I started
to feel really guilty. I thought, what am I taking from my children? I have a law degree. I had the means, or I had the trade to give them a really good life. And of course, I had friends who were still in the law. Families were going off on overseas holidays twice a year and so forth. And I thought, what have I done? I have very selfishly, because I am passionate about what I'm doing, taken this from my family. And I struggled with that for a long time. And I felt very guilty about it. And I remember talking to Marla Nunn, who's a wonderful Australian writer. And she said to me, Sulari, your children are getting things that you don't know about. They are getting to hang with writers. They come to festivals with you and they talk to the people who are writing the books that are being taught to them in class. And that means something. So I was looking at this is the problem. The problem is I'm doing what I love. I think I'm doing it well, but I'm not making money. I'm selling well in Australia, but there just isn't the numbers to make money. And it was at that time that I thought, right, I need to, change what I'm writing, because historical fiction is niche. And I started writing contemporary novels. And so I set off to try to write this literary fiction. And I kept saying to myself, okay, what's literary fiction? It can't be happy, no jokes. Everybody's got to be miserable.
These are the usual books that I dissent on at book club, literary fiction.
And so I set out to write a miserable book. And I nearly got through one chapter, and all of a sudden a body appeared. And all of a sudden I was writing a mystery. And that was Crossing the Lines. And that book won the Ned Kelly Award. And I mentioned that not to brag, but what it did was it introduced me to America.
So obviously you're like, okay, I'm writing, I'm doing what I want, but I'm not actually the practical isn't working. I'm not making money. But it doesn't sound to me like you thought maybe I should go back to law. You actually strategized a way to make the new pathway fulfill those practical needs.
Because I'm a corporate lawyer. That's what you do as a corporate lawyer.
Yeah.
If you have a problem, you find a way to go through. That's what you're employed to do. So I basically corporate lawed my own profession.
Yes. I didn't think about going back to be a corporate lawyer, interestingly. You pushed through.
No, I was, and one of these things, and part of it, I will admit, is there is a feeling like once you step off the treadmill, you're off. How do you get back on?
That's pretty unusual, though, that you didn't, Sulari. I think that shows a real strength of character, because I think that when you step off that treadmill, still opportunities come at you, right? Because that is where your network is. And so it's really hard, I think. I've found it quite hard to be very clear with, no, I'm not doing that, in moments when opportunities come my way. And so I think it's great that you've been able to do that. I don't think there's a lot of people that can, and I think that's why people sort of teeter on the edge for a while and pop in and out, and before they land anywhere.
I think I can't emphasize how much I am in love with the simple act of putting one word after another, putting one sentence after another, and telling a story. I just still. It is the most gratifying thing to my soul. So I realized I've got to go over there. I've got to go over there and meet people and shake hands and meet publishers and so on. So Jane Harper had done so well in America, so had Leanne Moriarty. Suddenly, everybody was looking at Australian crime writers. You can't control the ebbs and flows. What you can control is being ready when the ebb happens. So you have to be ready when the opportunity hits. And that's the advice. If I was speaking to a young writer, I would say, the thing is, you can't control, what's going to be popular, who's going to look at your manuscript, who's going to fall in love with it. But what you can do is be ready when the opportunity arises. Have a manuscript fully written, so that if you run into an agent or a publisher and they say, "Oh, we'd like to read what you're doing," you can pull out the manuscript and give it to them then and there before they change their minds. And that's how I got my American agent. I had a manuscript.
Yeah, great.
So when I was introduced to her, I could actually give her a completed manuscript. I got an American agent. That started feeding me into the American industry. And that's how, a lot of my career is now. I'm still an Australian writer. I still love being an Australian writer, but I get most of my money from the US.
Yes. What would you say to someone who's standing on the edge of a leap? They're still stuck in the shoulds. I should be doing this, I should be doing that, but they're still, I guess, yearning for that thing. Are there what would you say to someone if they
I think you can make a deal with yourself to buy yourself freedom. So if, for example, you have debt and you have a legal job and you're thinking, I want to be a writer, you can make a deal with yourself to say, okay, I will pay down this debt. And then once I'm done, then I've bought my freedom.
Yeah.
And I think as much as it may seem a lot more romantic for me to tell people, just go with it, devil may care, just jump into it. What you want is an escape that's sustainable. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to move in a way that doesn't cause you a huge amount of anguish. So I would actually just plan for it the way you plan for a holiday or plan for a changing, moving house. You say, okay, well, I want to write. Next year I want to be full-time. I have this legal profession. I'm going to plan for the 1st of January, I'm going to leave. And in the meantime, I'll do all the work and the overtime and set things up or whatever, so that it makes the leaving as easy as possible. And I think that can make it a lot more gentle a process for you. Yeah. If this is important enough to you, then it deserves a little bit of time to prep before you jump.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say to writers is it's a really vulnerable profession. Have one friend who'll be on your side regardless. So when you ring in tears because you've got a bad review, even if the review is perfectly reasonable, they will say to you that reviewer is an idiot. They don't know what. You need one person who'll do. Yep. You don't need to be surrounded by people who'll do that. You just need one person who in your lowest moments you can turn to, and they will get you back on the horse.
Yep. That's great. Well, look, Sulari, thank you so much for coming on. It's I've enjoyed it immensely.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
I really enjoyed reading your book as well, and I'm keen to read some more of them. So looking forward. You've got one coming out, I think, in a couple of months. So we'll keep an eye out for that.
Yes.
And we will pop in the show notes where it is that people can buy your books. And yeah, keep an eye out for the new one that's coming out. So thank you again so much. It's really been
a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Outlaw Diaries. If Sulari's story gave you a nudge, a laugh, or just made you feel a little bit more seen in your own messy middle, we would love it if you could follow, subscribe, or even better, leave us a rating or review wherever you listen.
And if you've got a friend who's dreaming of a different life, maybe someone secretly plotting their own exit strategy, share this episode with them. It helps more than you know, and it keeps the outlaw energy flowing.
We're also on socials, and we'd love to hear from you. What did this episode spark for you? You'll find all the links at www.outlawspodcast.com.
So until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and stay a little bit outlaw. See you later.
See you later.